it's not clear where you stand between those two issues. And what do you mean by us and you?
Us. There is still you and us.
Santa, and it would be great if I could get some sort of response regarding it. For the last bit, you say, let's have land for the dignity of our people. But how about taking away the hard work of others and taking away their dignity? How does this move us forward as a nation? Brand awareness thing that goes around, I am African, that pulled on people's emotional strings. I'm not saying that's necessarily the right way of doing it, but what is it? What is our brand moving forward?
There will never be us for as long as there is no equal ownership of this country. If you have arrived, it's good for you. It's good for you. But you and us refers to the owners of the means of production and those who supply their cheap labor to survive. Majority of our people are going through a lot. And I'm not going to be pretentious and say, it's not taking us forward, you and us. No, there's no us. There's no us. We are fighting to have us. As things stand now, and it's not Malema's problem, it's an apartheid colonialist problem. They divided us. They reserved jobs for you. They reserved economic opportunities for you. 1994 did not dismantle the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. That's why Mr. Santa says there is still an economic apartheid. So in apartheid means we are apart. There's them and us. Deny it. The reality is there's them and us. I want Santane and Alexander to be one thing. To be one thing. But they will never be one thing because Alexandra is for the blacks and Santane is for the white minority. The haves and the have-nots are subjected to that congestion in Alexander. So we will never address the issue of racial division if we do not agree and speak to the reality that we are divided because ownership is racially divided. So I'm not taking any dignity away from anyone. My sister, you have a dignity. We also want our dignity back. We have no dignity. We walk like we are ashamed to be here. Especially now at night. We do not enjoy the streets of Cape Town. Because we know that we are made to feel like we do not belong here. As we walk, we are treated like we are suspects in our own country. So we are not going to be coming here and saying to you, we are nice, we are enjoying it. We are not enjoying anything. We are not enjoying anything. We are still subjects of an exploitation in this country. And exactly this attitude of denialism is the one that perpetuates apartheid. Economic apartheid we have is because you are in denial. No, there's... No, it's good. The emotions must be high because that's what truth does to people. It gets their emotions very high.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Santo, you want to respond to that? And then we've got a question at the back, and then we've got a question here.
Okay. Look.
So, Julius Malema has long been an advocate for Africans in South Africa. And the interesting thing is that Julius Malema is not just an advocate for South Africans, he's also an advocate for Africans in the whole continent. Don't you find it interesting? Many political leaders we have in Africa, many are only about their country or their region. Julius Malema transcends boundaries. He transcends continents. He speaks for Africans in South Africa, in Africa, and also Africans beyond, which is the African diaspora. So in this particular video, an Indian lady was talking to Julius Malema asking about justice, because Julius Malema is always about justice. I want justice for Africans, I want justice for South Africans, and I want justice for African Americans. That is how Julius Malema talks. And it's so interesting, and there's a lot that is going to be uncovered from this. One thing that some of you may not know is that South Africa is a mixed race country. It's like the United States, only the difference is size. South Africa, the original inhabitants were the Khoisan people, the people with the clicking sound, or the Hottentots. Yeah, I was taught that in history. So Julius, South Africa has the British, it has the people from Dutch, which is the Afrikaans. It also has some Indians. These Indians came to South Africa as people who were working on the railways, which was being constructed by the Imperial British South African Company. So let's watch this video, and there's a lot we are going to uncover, and I'm promising you this, there's a lot I'm going to share with you as a fellow African American, African diaspora, South African, every black person. There's something interesting that you need to understand. So let's dive into the video, then let's get after the video.
I just want to say, and I really want to say this, that a function like this shows the good side of South Africa. We're at least talking to each other, and it's a start. So, you know, just get used to that idea.
Thank you very much. Donovan, do you have a question at the back?
Kaiches Atuwa Tama Kamske. It means, in my ancestral language, our struggle continues. Mr. Malema, you have no authority to talk about land ownership. The Khoisan is the only authentic voice that can talk about land. We were the first freedom fighters fighting the colonials when they came here 360 years ago. We were the first people of this nation. We were the first people of Southern Africa. And today we still face oppression. This country's history did not start in 1910 when the ANC was established, nor did it start in 1994 when we went to a democratic dispensation. We lived here, and you, your ancestors, and the white ancestors found us here. So we can only talk about land ownership as you found us here. The indigenous people of South Africa and Southern Africa needs to be restored. That was taken from them by the invaders. I thank you.
I'm not sure there was a question there. Is there was a statement? Would you like to answer?
Well, I think that you are extremely missing a point. Me and you are Africans. And this land you are referring to, and the whole of Africa, was one thing until the colonialists came to divide us. So you must never see yourself as being something different from what I am. Otherwise, you are inviting self-isolation. We, the black African majority and the Khoisan, were one thing. And we are the only ones who can speak with authority about the Africa, the continent of African majority. So don't take away, I'm not from Europe. My ancestors are not from Europe. This Africa belongs to Africans, and that's what the Khoisan are. Don't isolate yourself, my sister. This solidarity will help us to defeat colonialist and apartheid legacy.
Thank you very much. We've just got time for 2 more questions. I'm taking 1 question here and 1 question down there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vuisa Kabaka. I've just got 2 quick questions from the CIC and Mr. Santa. First of all, Mr. Santa, I just want to fundamentally disagree with you around the ability of South Africans to start businesses. You made a couple of examples. And what I'm going to premise my question around is the whole point around economic infrastructure investment in townships in South Africa and the lack thereof in the last 20 odd years in South Africa. So I just want to ask you, what is your take around the inability of the current ruling party to invest in economic infrastructure to enable and unlock? Because again, poverty in South Africa sits in the townships of this country, and yet that's where we're not creating infrastructure for economic enablement. For the CIC, I just want to say that those who feel it know it in Cape Town. So I do agree with you around some of the sentiments you've already made. But specifically to ask you to comment around 3 core areas that you have not specifically spoken to. One is the economic CODESA that Mr. Santa speaks of. Your take on the economic CODESA in the context of what you've spoken about today around those who are enabled and who've had centuries old of enablement in the context of economic CODESA, the National Development Plan, and the context of what the EFF speaks to around the National Economic Development Plan. And lastly, the fictitious black middle class that we all speak about, that is again fundamentally funded through state-owned infrastructure, whether it's government agencies, it's government companies, or it's government itself, that's creating this fictitious black middle class. I want to hear your comments around that.
I think we are in agreement about the economic CODESA. We needed to discuss about the land and how that land can be transferred to all. We needed to also discuss the worker share schemes. We need the economic CODESA to also deal with localization. Lot of chain stores in the country do not even buy local products. I mean, textile industry used to be something very big, especially here in Cape Town. But it's no longer that big because it has been undermined by cheap products which are brought into the country and sold by some of these chain stores. So how do we buy locally? How do we protect the local industries? And also, we need to discuss, Mr. Santa, about the minimum wage so that we close the wage gap, the apartheid wage gap, the minimum wage, and whether indeed through such intervention we will be in a position to help grow the economy. And the decisions of the economic CODESA, they have to be binding. They must bind, and then those are the decisions which will inform ultimately legislation and policy which is to be adopted by the state. So it is important that we have that a conversation. And I think we'll have that conversation because this is how it starts. It starts with us. And once we reach consensus through these types of engagement, then we say, how do we formalize some of this consensus that we are reaching through the continuous dialogue that we are having. But if we were to go to an economic CODESA when we are still far from each other, it will not be a very productive CODESA. we ought to genuinely liberate the mindset of our people and win them over so that they begin to appreciate that it is through genuine, legitimate economic freedom that our people will realize true freedom.
So, Julius Malema has emerged as a fervent advocate for land reforms and justice in South Africa, which is a country with a complex history of colonization, apartheid, and ongoing socio-economic disparities, you know. To understand Malema's struggle and vision, one must delve into the historical context of South Africa, tracing back to the arrival of white settlers and the establishment of the apartheid. So the history of South Africa, which is really important for us to understand what's really happening there, is this. The history of South Africa is marked by the arrival of the Dutch. The Dutch are the people from the Netherlands. So the Dutch colonialists, they arrived in South Africa in the 17th century. So it was called the Dutch India Company, which established a refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope. So what is this apartheid? Here is something that you need to know. Apartheid is an institutionalized system of racial segregation and discrimination. It was introduced in 1948 by the National Party. This policy entrenched racial inequality, limiting the rights and opportunities of the majority black population. The Group Areas Act of 1950 designated specific areas for different racial groups, forcibly removing millions of black South Africans from their homes to create racially segregated communities. This is how it started. It started in 1948 when it was introduced by the National Party in South Africa. So they never favored the majority black people, but they favored the minority white people. You see how complex this thing is, and for us to understand what is the message of Malema, why Malema is so important in South Africa right now, we need to go back to this history and look at this. So the effect of apartheid were profound and enduring. Not only did it result in economic disparities with black South Africans facing systematic discrimination and limited access to education and employment, but it also left a legacy of deep-seated social divisions. And that is what you saw from that conversation. That is what you saw from that speech when that woman was talking and Julius Malema was talking. It's just a consequence of what happened in the past, and we need to visit the past in order to understand the present. So in the face of this historical injustice, Julius Malema has emerged as a vocal advocate for land reforms and justice. You see, Malema, originally a member of the African National Congress, rose to prominence with the ANC Youth League before forming the Economic Freedom Fighters in 2013. So the EFF core principle include the expropriation of land without compensation, nationalization of key industries, and economic empowerment for the marginalized. Malema's call for land reform seeks to address historical imbalances by redistributing land to black South Africans. This resonates with a significant portion of the population who continue to experience the repercussion of dispossession and forced removals that was done by the white people who came during the pre-colonial eras, you know. However, this approach has generated a controversy, you know, with critics expressing concerns about the potential economic ramification and the need for a more nuanced and inclusive solution. So in the present day, South Africa grapples with the complex task of reconciling its historical legacy with the imperatives of justice and development. Malema's effort to address the historical injustices and economic disparities rooted in colonization and apartheid reflect broader societal aspiration for a more equitable future. That is what Brother Malema is always trying to do. In conclusion, Julius Malema's struggle for land reform and justice in South Africa is intricately linked to the nation's historical trajectory marked by colonization and apartheid. The effects of these historical injustices continue to shape the present, with Malema's vision for a more equitable society attempting to address deep-seated disparities.
It's not clear where you stand between those two issues,